We're back on college football addiction to talk about one of the newer members of the Big 12 and a massive coaching change. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Drake C. Toll on with us from Locked On Big 12. Appreciate BetUS for their support. Talk about them in a little while, but let's get right into it. Scott Frost back at UCF. What are your thoughts on this? Just immediate gut reaction now that the UCF Golden Knights have their coach back.
This is huge, TJ. You know, Scott Frost mentioned in his press conference that the ladder, they'd never tell you to stop climbing the ladder when you're happy. And that was the emotional, fun quote that Frost gave to UCF Nation as he comes back. And look, this is it's not necessarily a native son return, but it's a son of UCF return, a guy who brought them back to prominence. When he stepped into that role as the head coach at UCF, he was taking over a program that had just gone 0-12. Nobody really wanted that rebuild. It wasn't going to be a fun one, taking over for a legendary coach or a guy who's been there for a long time and won that Fiesta Bowl against Baylor and made UCF relevant, then goes 0-12. So now Scott Frost comes in and has to rebuild everything. There's a huge mess in Orlando. He does it in year one by going to a bowl game, and then in year two, beating Auburn and winning a New Year's Six Bowl. And that guy is now back as the head coach of UCF. We know that it's worked out. We know that it's worked out once. And with wins against Maryland and Auburn, the way he pummeled teams like Cincinnati or Memphis, we know that Scott Frost can win against opponents that were then Power 5, today Power 4. I'm not worried about that. He's a guy who loves UCF. I think he's going to be there for a good few years. And I do believe, and I think we'll get into this, TJ, his Nebraska tenure should not be held against him as hard as some people may.
Yeah, the ceiling there feels like it could be pretty high. Yeah. They're in a very talent-rich state.
God.
We've talked about this. We've talked about teams that could rise up in the Big 12 and have a little more staying power, maybe not like a Texas, Oklahoma, but somewhat in that vein. Mm-hmm. With the recruiting that they can do there with a guy who, if he succeeds, is going to be there a long time. Like, I don't see him using this as another stepping stone job. Now if a massive program comes calling, I don't know, we'll see. But I don't think he's looking to go anywhere. I think that probably helps him being a little more locked in, a little more solid there, round two. So the ceiling feels incredibly high for them in the Big 12, considering all those things. What's the floor, though? Like, what's the disaster scenario? Could this, and what are your thoughts? Could this go sideways? Could this go wrong with Scott Frost at UCF part two?
This absolutely can go wrong. There are no two ways around it. In college football, you can bring back the legend. Look at North Carolina and Mac Brown. It's not as if they were bringing back this guy who is, oh my gosh, going to lead us to a national championship. But here's a legendary coach that's been to titles, won a title. We're going to bring him in and let him win here. And when he fell flat on his face over the course of a couple of years, it was okay, now we have to fire the guy mid-season. That can happen with Scott Frost. It's always a possibility. Do I believe it will? No, I think this is more so a case of like a Bill Snyder when he comes back to Kansas State. It's a little bit different, obviously, but he comes back to Kansas State, has more success there than he'd had previously by leading them to number one, having Colin Klein at quarterback. That's what I would like to compare this to, and what you hope for if you're a Big 12 fan or a UCF fan is that school continues to succeed in such a recruiting hotbed as Central Florida. Now, TJ, here's what I want to go back to with Nebraska. Many will say, all right, well, worst case scenario is he just does what he did at Nebraska. I don't believe that will be the case because the pressure is mostly off. At Nebraska, it was, hey, come win a national championship. The second he got hired, he was truly the native son there, a guy who had played for the Huskers, and they named September 1st Scott Frost Day. That's insane. They named a day after the guy, and they wanted to come in and win at a top level, and win more so than a guy like Bo Pelini had done, and he won a lot of games, and Scott Frost obviously could not do that when he was the coach of the Huskers, and so with that, UCF takes a whole lot of pressure off. The expectation's not near as high, and I think that bodes well for Frost. So while the floor is still there, it can't go away, I do believe this is a better situation for him than Lincoln ultimately was.
I'm going to take this full circle here in just a second, but the Scott Frost Day is big Texas A&M vibes with giving Jimbo Fisher the trophy, the national championship trophy that just didn't have a date on it quite yet. Jimbo Fisher coming from Florida State, UCF's old coach, Gus Malzahn, now at Florida State as an offensive coordinator. We haven't gotten a chance to talk about this, but we'll tie it all together. UCF with Scott Frost, Gus Malzahn at Florida State as an offensive coordinator. And I kind of think in a similar situation, like I don't really know that Gus is able to or will use this Florida State job as a stepping stone. You may disagree there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But just thoughts on that dynamic of Malzahn at Florida State now. Are they in a good position? Do you like that move for the UCF fans that are watching this, thinking about their old coach too? I'll get right back to the video, but first I do want to give some love to our friends over at BetUS. The bowl season is coming, the playoffs are coming, and you can bet on all of it over at betus.com. Use our code YouTube150, that's YouTube150 for a 150% bonus when you sign up using that code. That's on your first deposit. Your next 2 deposits are at 125% each. All of that up to $2,000. We appreciate BetUS for their support this season. And the betting is not done. Neither are the games. Make sure that you're using YouTube 150 when you bet at BetUS.
TJ, I wish this was an entire video because I could go on and on. I'm from Arkansas, and we were born and raised to support Gus Malzahn, who's a guy that but pioneered a unique offense, and he stuck to it. And that's Kenny Dillingham alluded to this, that Gus is stuck in his ways. He'll go to Florida State, and I do believe, if I had to call it right now, as someone who really does appreciate Gus Malzahn, Christy, the entire Malzahn family, this is the last job that Gus will have at the Power 4 level. I don't believe it lasts longer than a year at Florida State because he's run that same offense. You kind of know what to expect at this point, and multiple teams can defend it. They know what the playbook has looked like, how to scout a Malzahn offense, and his rebuild project alongside Mike Norvell is one that is a lot, and he couldn't walk into a very positive UCF situation and keep the momentum going. So how is he going to go and rebuild? I just don't see it. It feels like if you're a UCF fan, Gus Malzahn gave up on you. The university could have given him another year. I think they would have given him at least one more year. And Malzahn said, you know what? This is too hard. Josh Heupel could do it. Scott Frost, who fell on his face in Nebraska, he could do it. I can't. I'm out. Sorry, I'm going to go be an offensive coordinator somewhere else. I don't think it's a good situation for anybody involved in the Malzahn camp, and I don't see it going well. I think UCF actually wins in the end by losing Gus Malzahn. And I hate to say it as somebody who has been a lifelong supporter of the Malzahn name.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the talent that Florida State could potentially bring in can outdo or outweigh some of the issues that you probably know are coming with Gus, and just the familiarity. You know, people like to, he did this with Cam and he did this with Nick Marshall, and that's been a long time.
10 years ago. Yeah,
that wasn't last year.
Right. And I think if you're Mike Norvell, what's going to be tough is you have another head coach on the roster. You have another head coach sitting in there who wants to pilot the offense. And the second that there comes a rub, Gus Malzahn is known for being strong, very hard-headed. He's not going to be your offensive coordinator very long. He wants to be a head coach and run a program. You saw that when he left Auburn for Arkansas State just to get a head coaching gig, and then ultimately comes back to Auburn as the head coach and gets fired in the end. So we'll see how it works out for Florida State. But again, I think if you're UCF, you're very happy to have Scott Frost in that chair, not Gus Malzahn.
When you go back to Scott Frost and we think about this, what will we mentioned the pressure not being the same and not being there as much as certainly it was in Lincoln. What is the timeline? Like, will they be patient enough to, 6 is 6 good enough next year, right? Mm-hmm. Are they okay with that? Are they okay with a little bit of time for him to recruit, for him to get some guys in? Wouldn't be surprised if some guys jump in the portal from UCF. Now, I don't think they'll lose everybody. I don't think it's going to be some mass exodus like Washington was or anything like that. But what are your thoughts on just a timeline, expectations, and patience in Central Florida?
Well, if UCF had gone with G.J. Kinney, he would have a much shorter lease. We don't know G.J. Kinney. He's walking in, supposed to be the transfer portal guru who can turn a program around in year one. Scott Frost, on the other hand, he's the guy that we all know and love, and every former player has said this is it. He's the guy who's going to bring a better culture to UCF. We're going to be back on the sideline supporting the school. So with that, you bought yourself 3 years. He's bought himself 3 years, barring a 2-10, 1-11 situation. I do believe Scott Frost will have UCF in a bowl game next season. They were a game away this year. They went to one last year. He'll have them in a bowl game next season, and Frost in 3 years will contend for a Big 12 championship. I do not think we'll have to worry about how long that leash can get.
Drake, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your work, more of your content covering not only UCF, but all of the Big 12?
Yeah, at LO Big 12 or at Drake Cetol on Twitter, and Locked On Big 12 wherever you find your podcasts.
Awesome. I appreciate you. Appreciate BetUS for their support, man. We'll do it again soon.
Always.